I'm a private investigator, and these are some of the weirder cases I've done. Part 3, by Rick Song 1. Like the last post, here's an update based on your responses about Tim's case. One comment told me to contact Tim's father. Yes, that was the first thing I thought of when hearing his mother passed away. However, she mentioned during the investigation that Tim's father had already passed away from an accident years ago. Only the pair moved here. She said there were some relatives, but they were back in China, so I had to leave things to the local lawyers. As for the idea of finding DNA on Tim's clothes, well, you guys have to understand that DNA tracking is a luxury available only to CSI, FBI, CIA, Interpol, you know. Private investigators do not have a big high-tech lab to find every detail, and not to mention the fact that the church staff regularly washed Tim's clothes. So I don't think that there were any DNA traces left on him. The aftermath of Tim's death was quite tragic. The journalist seemed to listen to the dumb kids at his school and fabricated a story about how Tim was involved in gang business to get money for his studies. The business went bad, so he was tortured and ran away. Both he and his mother were buried in a public graveyard. But I don't know if any of their relatives ever came to visit the graves. However, I returned to the school after reading the confessions and trying to do some research out of curiosity, and I found something quite unnerving. I managed to convince the school security department to let me check the CCTV feeds. They were quite nice and wanted to help the investigation. After a long and really tiresome process of checking clips after clips, I found the exact feed at the moment the student mentioned seeing Tim with the man. The footage was a bit blurry, but I could make out the student, Tim, and the man. The man was, as mentioned, sporting a black, long coat. I was able to get another camera angle showing his face. I was shocked. The man had an eerie resemblance to the history professor that I interviewed, but it could not be him. The professor was about 50, and this man was in his 30s, like a younger version of the professor. I dug into the professor's family and found out that he had a daughter, a sister, and no grandchildren. His sister had a son, but he did not look like the man at all. There was no explanation. I abandoned the investigation after a while. It did not go anywhere, and no one was funding me. As for what Tim had seen, I'm sorry guys, but I didn't find out anything. Okay, so here's another unnatural case, and it's quite recent too. It happened last year. There is a bit of graphic content towards the end, so I'm just gonna do a not safe for work disclaimer right here in case you don't want to hear any of this. I mentioned in the last post that there was a community of PIs thanks to the internet. There are private places online for us PIs to talk, discuss cases, and keep tabs on each other. When someone needed help, there should always be a reply. One day, I received an email from a PI assistant, who was also a friend. She said she had lost contact with her PI, let's call him Jack, and he had told her to contact me if anything ever went wrong. Now, Jack was a good friend. I worked with him at times, and we often shared our experiences in the bars, so it made sense for me to be his backup plan. His assistant was his little sister. She had just recovered from heart surgery, so Jack went out alone. His sister explained to me that Jack was working on a case about a missing tourist girl prior to her surgery, and she could not contact him via phone, text, or Facebook. I took the case with the price of a night at the bar. So here's the details of the case. A tourist girl traveled to a remote town in Ireland for vacation. She never came back, so her parents got worried and hired a private investigator because the police were unresponsive. Jack accepted the case as the parents were quite rich. Prior to going quiet, he sent back a photo of a tombstone in a graveyard to his sister with the message, "Tell him to look for it and bring his own supply of water." That was my first lead. Now, PI only goes dark in two situations. Either he's dead, or he's running away from something very awful. So I prepared some protection. 2 handguns, 2 knives, a stun gun, a personal tracker linked with Jack's sister's computer, and a personal supply of water to last about 4 days. I wanted to bring more, but I figured I would be chased out of town, so the lighter my belongings, the better. I booked a plane ticket straight to Ireland, then a cab to the town and a room in a hotel in the town. It was a pain, 9 full hours of flight, but the cool atmosphere in Ireland was refreshing. I arrived at the hotel about 5 p.m. The rest of the town was nice. It was a seaside town with a harbor, a beach, a rocky cliff, and a forested area. The town had old European architecture that attracted lots of tourists. Half of the people I saw were backpackers who didn't even really speak English. The town was known for its special spring water and drink beverages. Apparently, the town had access to some fresh underground water source that made it extremely good for drinks, and people loved drinking it. I would love to buy some as a souvenir too, but Jack's message made it suspicious. I was at the hotel, and one thing immediately caught my eye. On the walls of the hotel, as well as other stores and buildings in town, were wanted posters. The posters had 2 photos. One was Jack, and one was the missing girl, with the line, "Please beware, this man is a criminal, responsible for the murder of this girl. Please inform the authorities if you see him." I played the role of a dumb tourist who could barely speak English, and I asked the receptionist about the poster. Based on his words, Jack showed up in town over a week ago. He allegedly disturbed the town ceremony, kidnapped the host girl, and ran off into the forest. Yeah, the girl was not a tourist at all. She was a local girl from a noble family, responsible for the town's traditional ceremony. Jack kidnapped the girl from her home and burned her alive in the forest. The local police found the body of the girl, but not Jack. I settled into my room, and I had 2 sandwiches from the vending machine as a meal. I wanted to try the local cuisine, but I feared that they might have messed with the food too. I packed up and headed out about 6:30 p.m. My first objective was to look for the tombstone in Jack's message. The town's cemetery took a while to walk to. The weather was getting colder and approaching sundown. It didn't take much time to find the tombstone. I happened to find a small metal box hidden near it. There was a piece of paper inside, and it read, "Walk on to the coast, find the cathedral on the cliff. Use the rocky path. They will see you on the walkway. You need to see it yourself. Do not drink the water under any circumstances." It was in Jack's handwriting, so I guessed I should follow his directions. The water was mentioned again. Fortunately, I had brought my own bottled water. I traveled back to the main area of the town at about 7 p.m., and things were odd. I heard the sound of a bell ringing in the distance, probably the cathedral. The street was empty. No one was around. It was like a ghost town. The light in the building was on, but all of the doors were closed, and I couldn't see anyone through the window. I returned to my hotel, yet the gates were locked. I guess I'm sleeping outside. I wandered the streets for a while. There were no people around. All the stores, even the pubs, were empty. Where did everybody go? I thought to myself. I headed to the beach. The wind was heavy and cold, but my coat could handle them. There was a church like the letter mentioned, on top of a rocky cliff. I looked to the left side, and there was an upper walking path too. However, I could see the town people walking on it in a strange manner. They were walking in a perfectly straight row. Their legs moved in sync, better than any army. They were quiet. I couldn't hear any sound from that direction. Something was definitely wrong. So, the rocky path it was. The path was high, slippery, and the water down below was dark. Falling down there would probably kill me. It's a good thing that I had climbing shoes and gloves. One thing that I've often hated about cliffs like this is that you can never see how deep the water is below. I made it up to the church top, and I found myself hiding behind a wooden box, waiting for all of the town people to enter the cathedral. I waited about 10 minutes for all of the people to enter, and then I climbed through the window. The inside of the cathedral was huge and beautiful. However, I noticed that this was not your typical Catholic or Christian cathedral. There was no sign of common religious figures or symbols like the cross, Jesus, the Virgin Mary. Rather, there were these spiral symbols decorated everywhere, engraved on the walls, the floor, the chairs. At the far end was an unusual statue of a large humanoid figure. having 2 straight legs and multiple squid-like limbs. I'm not an expert on religious study, but I did not recognize this figure from any belief system. The people were going through the door behind the statue, so I followed them. The door led to a spiral staircase going straight down. There was a huge catacomb or sanctuary built into the rocks. I've never seen anything like this before. The walls were high and filled with the symbol. There were huge water pipes pumping water from the water below the floor. And the floor was something unimaginable. It was made entirely out of what can only be described as translucent, glowing glass. The surface was bright, yet you could see through it as clear as air, and beneath it was the dark, murky salt water. I could see things in the water. I don't really know how to describe them. At first sight, they looked like huge tree branches or roots. Probably that's what made the water special. I kept walking down the sanctuary. There were a couple of doors at the end. I picked one at random to enter. Behind it was something of a laboratory. There was medical equipment, and the smell of chemicals was prominent. There were a bunch of files on the table, and being a good detective, I took a look. Each of the files contained photos of a girl, some x-ray scans, and graphic photos. They were part of a big experiment. The girls were mostly townfolk and a few tourists. The files barely had any words, mostly photos, and based on what I saw, the experiment consisted of the bodies being surgically infused with a strange material, which the files called his gift. There were no clear photos of the material, and the files only showed its property. Based on the x-ray scan, the material was inserted in the abdomen, probably the womb. Despite being a gift, it always caused organ failure. It increased the blood toxicity by 90%, and it caused massive growth in skin cancer cells. After only 5 minutes, the bodies were swelled up. Blood poured out of their sockets, their skin rotted, and there was mention of exploding torsos due to changing pressure. Trust me, these photos were not pleasant to look at all. There were 30 files in total. 29 of them were marked as failure, meaning that 29 girls died. But there was one girl who had survived. It was the girl that Jack supposedly killed. I left the room and tried another door. This time I entered a huge round stadium. It was like a miniature coliseum. The town people sat in a circle while some event was taking place in the lower area. I found myself sitting on one part of the stadium, apart from the people, and they didn't seem to notice me. At the central area, a small group of people was gathered. There were 2 big guys, one old man wearing a priest outfit, and a couple of girls without any clothes, surrounding a bed-sized table. The crowd was chanting in some kind of language that I didn't understand. Their voices were eerily harmonious, as if there was one person singing. One girl laid on the table. The 2 big guys cuffed her arms and legs. The priest raised his arm, holding a big chunk of flesh in one hand and a knife on the other. The crowd chanted louder while I nervously watched. The priest cut a straight line on the girl's belly. Blood spilled on the table. The priest then pushed the flesh inside the open wound. The crowd went loud as if they were cheering. After a few seconds, the girl's body shook violently, like she was in a seizure. Her skin color darkened to an ashen color. Blood was pouring out of her eyes, nose, and ears. She began to scream. It echoed through the surrounding pillars. Half a minute went by, and her torso was ripped open from the inside. Blood splattered on the surrounding people. As a defensive reaction, I covered my face and looked down. It was at that moment that I saw the true horror. Beneath the translucent floor, in the deep dark water, I saw a huge eyeball attached to a gigantic body mass. Then I realized it was not the water that turned dark. It was the skin color of the monstrous thing. This thing was unnaturally huge. There was no end or beginning in sight, just an endless mass stretching out into the vast water that we called the ocean. Its eye twitched slowly. The enormous pupil moved and stared directly at me. We had direct eye contact, and I froze for a few seconds. The town people turned towards me, the same time that the eye turned towards me. Their eyes emitted a yellow light, the same color as the eyeball. Their faces had a blank, emotionless expression. They charged at me. I pulled out my guns, and I fired a warning shot to the ceiling, but they continued charging. I shot the guy closest to me in his legs, and he fell down, but then he got back up again and kept charging. It was my signal to get out of there. I jumped over my seat and I ran straight to the door. I ran to the sanctuary, and then it hit me. Beneath me was not branches and roots. Rather, it was the large, huge limbs of whatever was in the water. Jack, what did you get me into? I thought. I climbed up the stairs and I kicked the door open. I could hear the town people below. I ran out of the entrance. The town guy was guarding it and he tackled me. I grabbed his arms, threw him to the ground, and broke it. Rather than screaming in pain, the guy muttered calmly, "You will not stop me. Your friend did not stop me. Your order shall not stop me. My kind will walk the earth once more." I punched the guy in his face and he collapsed. I closed the cathedral door and I locked it from the outside, hoping that it would slow down the people. I got back to town and it was still empty as before. I arrived at the local hotel entrance and I shot the gate open. There was no one inside too, so I ran up to my room. I packed all of my stuff, and meanwhile, people were at the far end of the town. I got back to the first floor. There was a motorcycle parked by the hotel's entrance. I found the key at the reception desk, unlike in a dumb horror movie, and the bike started normally. I drove out of the hotel and headed to the forest path. The people tried to chase me, but they gave up after a while. I could still hear them chanting far in the distance. "You will not stop me. You will not stop me. You will not stop me." I rang Jack's sister and I told her that the town was not a friendly option and I needed directions. She told me that from the satellite images there should be an abandoned camping site with a warehouse about a mile away. I could use it as a temporary shelter. I got to the destination after about 15 minutes of driving through the forest. The warehouse door had already been opened. I stepped inside and turned on the light, and I found out why Jack had gone dark. Jack's body lay in the corner. He had been dead for days. Flies were flying all in the room. His phone was next to him. I managed to boost it up by using my charger. There was a new voice recording, and here's what it said. "Hey man, if you're listening to this, I'm guessing my sister had gone through the operation and she called you. Sorry, but there won't be any free drinks this time. This is my last stop. Those town folks hit me hard. I'm surprised I can drag myself this far. I bet you want an answer. My sister's condition was worsening. She needed an operation, but the fees were going to be so high. I couldn't figure out a way to pay for it. Then one day, some men in suits came to my door. They were from some secretive organization that won't tell me the name, but they're willing to pay me 8 figures for the operation. Their job was simple. Go to this town and kill a girl to get paid. I know, our jobs are not to be murderers, but I was desperate. It was either a random girl or my sister. I figure you have to have seen the thing under the town, right? Yeah, it freaked me out the first time I looked down, too. The men in the suits said that it was some kind of ancient creature that belonged to some kind of ancient race. It was the last of its kind, and it's been there before us humans. The men called it the Dawnbringer. I really wish this was just a sick joke. Somehow it had been dormant, sleeping for billions of years. Its body secretes some kind of something into the water supply, making the locals who drink it very docile. It could talk to them even when it was sleeping, and somehow in recent years it woke up. It wanted to repopulate the world with its kind. But how can you do that when you are the last one? By banging the locals, of course. It commanded the local people to do experiments and try to merge its part with the local girls. Somehow that might lead them to being pregnant with its child. As you can tell, the experiments mostly failed. The girls died horribly. But they probably don't mind since they're being mind-controlled anyway. That is, except for one girl. There was no missing girl and no rich parents. I lied so that my sister wouldn't get worried. The girl was the only successful test subject. She somehow survived and became the bearer of that thing's child. My job was to kill her, eliminating the thing inside her as well. After a long and painful process, I managed to take her from the pack and fled into the forest, where I proceeded to kill her. The killing was tough too. A bullet in the head would not cut it. I was told that fire was the only option. I tied the girl to a tree and poured alcohol on her. She was crying and begging for me to stop, and she told me that she just wanted to be a mother, while I told myself that I was saving humanity. I burned her. I looked straight into her eyes. Was it the right thing? I don't know. I was burning a pregnant woman alive. If this was some kind of sick joke, and I was a delusional one, well... Was there really any monster in the water, or was I just hallucinating? But I told myself that if I didn't do this, my sister might die. The life of a stranger in exchange for the life of a person that you hold dear, you would do the same, my friend. The town people, they soon found me and gave me a good shot. Anyway, I'm here now, talking to a phone, hoping that my friend can somehow hear it. I don't have it in me to tell her, and I don't want you to tell her. I don't want you to tell her what I've done. Please take care of my sister for me. You're the only one that I've got left. Don't look any further into this, man. This is way out of our league. We are just cattle, trying to survive. Whatever is happening here, you can't let my sister be a part of it. You hear me? Well, goodbye, man. I would buy you that drink I promised if we had another chance. I found a piece of cloth and I wrapped Jack's body in it, and I attached it to the back of the bike. I drove far away into the night to ensure that I was safe. With the permission given by the sister, I burned his body and I collected the ash. On my way home, I saw some black SUVs going the opposite direction towards the town.